Okay, so for an inspector calls, some important things in context, and this will be on Firefly so you can see the events that happened. So we need to just understand, again, the period of time, writer's purpose, what's he trying to reflect, what does he want us to learn from what's been happening in the last couple of years. So we have things like the Queen Victoria died, Edward became her son, so we changed from one era to the next, which is always really unsettling anyway. Lots of literature's focused around that change at the end of you're going to make me feel old now. You probably weren't even born. When it went into the year 2000 and everybody thought that the world was going to blow up because the clocks couldn't go round anymore because digital watches got what happens when you get to 00 is the end. So how does it then go back? How does it go from 19 something to 20 something? And this has never happened, and everyone was going, the world's going to end.
Y2K.
Yeah, it was Y2K, the year, and it was an actual thing. Okay? And it was this panic about what on earth's going to happen when midnight hits and everything goes off. Has any of you seen the video by J-Lo? I can't remember what it is, when she's dancing at a party and then it hits midnight and everything goes off. And that was that year, that was the expectation, that all the computer systems, everything, all technology was going to stop. And this is quite recent, okay? And it was a real worry. So even today, in my society, my world, I experienced that. I was, your age-ish. And it was like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I'm going to stay up just to see. Oh, nothing, it's all fine. You just went back to 01. But it was a thing. So moving between eras is always that, what might happen as we go into the next phase. Then we obviously have the Titanic sinking, which is huge. We had World War I. During World War One, no matter how rich or poor, everybody was forced to go. So many people died. You know about World War One, I don't need to tell you. Then we had 1920s, which was a real time of prosperity, where the rich and the classes started to really show. Then we had 1918-ish, women given the right to vote. And then we have an Inspector Calls here, after World War II. So he's writing the play here, but setting it here. So all of the audience have lived all of this. So when Mr. Burnin says, war, no chance of it, Titanic, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable, it's deliberate. Because we know there have been 2 world wars and probably most of our family have died, and we know the Titanic sank. And we know who to blame. We don't like Mr. Burling. Instantly for that reason. What technique is this called? Well done, thank you. Okay? So, if we think about political views, and this could be something, I don't know if we went through this or not. Priestley had really strong political views, and this can be argued that it is a political play. When we talk about the inspector being his mouthpiece, I think that's Olivia's favourite phrase that she took, that's sort of exactly what it is that he's doing. So during the 1930s, Priestley was concerned about the consequences of social class and inequality. He didn't like it. It was too rich and too poor, and the balance was wrong. So he witnessed and watched all of this happening. He set up a political party called the Commonwealth Party, and he argued for this public ownership, that actually everything shouldn't belong to the rich people, we should all have access. So socialist, we should all have an opportunity to go to the park. It should be public. It shouldn't just belong to the people who the rich people. And this is essentially what he did. They then sort of merged with the Labour Party, but essentially Priestley himself influenced developing the welfare state, the welfare system. being able to support people who can't support themselves. The rich taxes going to support. The fact that we can all work together as members of one body. And this is where we say he's the mouthpiece, because everything he was trying to do is what the inspector says in his final speech. So that's a nice contextual connection that might help you. He genuinely believed that world wars, they could be avoided because they were mostly about power and control. And actually, if we could just respect each other and acknowledge our differences, then we didn't need to have wars moving forwards. So this play was a huge warning politically to so many people. And we kind of read it on a different level, but when you think these people have just experienced this, we know who Priestley is. He's actually quite an influential character. He then writes this play. You're probably going to sit up and listen to it. You're definitely going to dislike the Burlings. How can you not? There you go. Then we have like nuclear arms coming in, and this Russian Revolution then taking place. We had the Holocaust, we've got the atomic bomb. There's all of this stuff going on where he just says, this has to stop. Like, we need to stop hitting self-destruct because we're going to kill ourselves. There's going to be no society left at all. So this is quite useful just for you to identify the differences between the classes. And again, you can look at this yourself, but we have 1912, the First World War starts, which is where Burling is completely wrong. When it was written, we've just had 6 years of warfare and uncertainty and poverty. So the people watching it would be looking back thinking, how are they even in this really nice suburban house drinking port and having a dinner party? Like, what is that? You kind of resent even the setting of the play. Then we've got the distinctions between the classes. Luckily that distinction was reduced because obviously we had the wars and women had to work, and we had the suffragette movement and all of those things. So the angle is slightly different on the people watching the play. When it's set, we've got women completely subservient to men, and the cheap labour, which is Eva and the Burling Company, and the way Eva is treated by every single character in the whole play. Yet when it's written, there was a little bit more respect for women. We did have a bit more of a place in society. And then we've got a little bit about the classes. So you can see the huge divide between what he's trying to remind people that if we go back to this, we're just going around in a circle and things are not going to improve. This is a big warning to, at this point in society, change. Because if we don't, this is just going to repeat and there's going to be nobody left. That was his view. And that's why he wrote the play. So it's more depth to it than we sort of think, to be honest. If we then try and make this, right, so how does this link and relate? So we've got Priestley using Mr. Burling as a symbol, because that is what he is. Every character, explore the significance of, they are all significant. Each character is there to represent something. And we've got Mr. Burling as a symbol to represent selfishness, arrogance of capitalist and Edwardian society. He wanted his audience to dislike him. We do. We've talked about this so much from the beginning. We need to reject the attitudes that he has because we need to be more responsible, more socialist. So that's a really important one for Mr. Burling and what he represents. We then have Mrs. Burling. Mrs. Burling is the symbol to represent wealth, privileged classes, selfish attitudes. She sees the working class as morally inferior. She completely dismisses girls of that class. She has no respect. That's her job. She's in this play. She is this snob. That's what she's there to represent, this wealth. So that is her job, her role in the play. Then we've got Sheila and Eric. Their symbol is to represent the younger generations, which we know the theme of old and young generations and the divide between the two of them. Sheila gives the audience hope that we can improve and take responsibility for our actions, because the older generations won't change and won't take responsibility. They are the hope for the future, which we've talked about a lot. Essentially, Sheila reflects the gender equality. She is that younger generation. We can connect her to the fact that women now have more rights and can work. Her mother never got any of that. The suffragette movement affects and impacts Sheila, not Mrs. Burling. So perhaps that's why Sheila is a bit easier to change, because she has just gone through the wars and the experience and realises that this is bad. Then we've got Eric, who initially we think is this kind of spoilt child who could abuse his power. And he does, and the way that he, his treatment of people is an abuse of his power for the working classes. But actually, he can show more than that, and he does change, and he does accept responsibility, and he does feel guilty. What you may, grade 9, want to question is whether he, because it directly impacted him, his child, perhaps that's why he's able to change. Maybe if it was external, someone else, would he have changed as easily as Sheila? Because she just feels guilty. She didn't do something really that bad, whereas Eric's treatment of her is personal. Is that why he feels regret? That's your decision. Then obviously the younger generations, which I've mentioned, and it's Gerald, and he's the really difficult one, because we don't know if we like Gerald or not. I'm still not sure. I don't think I like him. I've talked about this a lot with a lot of students over the last couple of weeks, and I think I've come to the decision that I don't like him. I think I'm saying it. He represents selfishness, the selfish attitudes of the upper classes. He's not on the same level as Mr. Burling. He's younger. He has had these experiences. But ultimately, he changes his attitudes, but he's been brought up in this class and society. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with someone about the ring and what the ring symbolises, and that does Gerald really have any feelings for Sheila? And I'd make the argument that he doesn't. Who benefits from this marriage? Gerald. Yes, Mr. Burling does. It's a marriage of convenience. This is a business transaction. Gerald benefits from that too, because his rival business company becomes partly his, and they work together for prosperity and prices. It's not about Sheila. I would argue he had more feelings towards Eva, the way he talks about Eva, the way she's described, the way he looks after her. He doesn't do any of that for Sheila. And then at the end, he says, "I can have the ring back now, it's all okay." So he doesn't really learn. He doesn't really change. He's on that level there, really, where I would make the argument that his feelings towards Sheila are totally mirroring what he gains from it. But his class is he's up here. So he's marrying Sheila because of what she has and who she is, nothing about actually Sheila. So her handing that ring and her saying no is a huge symbol for her, that she wants to find love, and she can represent that power that women have gained over the last couple of years. And then, as we know, we have the inspector, who's representing Priestley's voice. He conveys those socialist views, which we've already talked about. He challenges the characters. He interrupts them at the perfect time when the doorbell's ringing, when he questions them. He holds all his cards to his chest and lets them completely talk themselves into it all. He's in control. I've kind of put here, you could argue that he's almost godlike. He's that omniscient, all-seeing, knowing character. But if we're saying that he's Priestley's mouthpiece, political mouthpiece, he needs to stand back and have that power and control. And it's important that he has more power than the Burlings and Gerald, because he's the socialist. So actually socialism in power can work because the inspector was successful. Grade 9. And then Eva, I kind of hope a question on her comes up because I think she's a great character to talk about, but essentially, yes, she's the symbol of the working classes. She is there to represent women and men in the lower classes, exploited by capitalists, exploited by the Burling family, exploited by Gerald and his family. Essentially, the audience kind of, because of what we've just experienced and gone through, we're on her side, and the way she's treated is appalling. And we think that today, let alone immediately watching this play in 1945, having gone through what they've just gone through. So loads of different characters are there, writer's purpose to represent something. And then I'm going to just move on to here because I thought this was our last bit. Perfect. So this is an answer, and I've just highlighted where the context is in red. Because I want you to be able to see how it's not a separate thing. It's not like just ticking a box and tagging it on the end of every paragraph, so I've mentioned it. It should just sort of filter in and be part of what you're saying to help make your point stronger. That's where it becomes effective and it puts you in that top band. So we have, on a superficial level, Priestley constructs Mrs. Burling, the embodiment of Edwardian elite in 1912. There's my context. I've just chucked it in brackets, but I've got loads of marks for it. As irresponsible. Through this, Priestley's character of Mrs. Burling is central to symbolising the lack of responsibility held by upper to lower classes. That's context. You think you're not putting context in there. You would all say that. They're there to represent this class system. They're there to represent the change or the lack of change. That's context. You're doing it anyway. Then we took capitalism, ideology, nature to Mrs. Burling. He uses structure and form to convey the importance of wealth. The house of the Burlings is described as large, but not cosy and home-like, suggesting the significance of wealth to Mrs. Burling and conveying her upper-class status. The fact that Priestley mentions this first, stage directions at the beginning, conveys perhaps all is not well. It hints at this idea that under the surface, there's no substance to this family. There's nothing warm. She doesn't know her children. He's allowing the audience to understand how Mrs. Burling, a member of the upper class, along with the rest of the Burlings, are likely to treat their others. This is because you asked about Mrs. Burling, so you can read that in a bit more detail. But it's just really realising that you're throwing stuff in. I still believe that if you can make a really strong, powerful introduction and get your context in there, you know you've done it. You'll do it automatically as you're dripping it through here. But when you get that opening, if we're doing a character question, everything on that previous slide, the significance of that character, that's all context, because they're all there to represent something that happened, something about the context, something that Priestley's experienced that he wants to reveal to society. So the knowledge you have of Priestley and who he was and what he's trying to achieve potentially forms that really strong introduction that's not everything that happens in the play, but is a powerful opening statement about what the significance of this person is, who they're there to represent, and how they show Priestley's purpose and views and what he's trying to do in society. That's that big bit. Does that make sense? You all look mildly terrified, so it must have been